today we are really privileged to have to be able to talk to Dr. Peter Munn, CEO of Centrecare Catholic Family Services Country SA. Thank you so much for allowing us to interview you, Peter.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. So, what is your current position?
Current position is CEO of Centrecare Country SA, to shorten that title. It's a long one. And really we are located over close to 1 million square kilometres, and we have offices in Port Pirie, Port Augusta, Whyalla, Woodner, Ceduna, Coober Pedy and Port Lincoln.
Wow, so that's a lot of...
it's a lot of area.
It is, yeah. A lot of responsibility and area
and a
to
mix
cover.
of rural and remote locations. So, and different skills level, qualifications, a whole range of things amongst the staff in each of those locations.
Yeah. So what sort of services do you provide?
A whole range. Our core services and what we initially started with is still there, and that's mainly the counselling services. So we provide counselling in many of the centres. We also provide mediation services, particularly family dispute resolution. Financial counselling has grown in the last couple of years. Foster care is a major program. We're also working in what's called the Stronger Family, Safer Children program, which is working intensively with families where the child might be taken away, and also in reunification where we're trying to reunite the family with the child. And in some centres like Ceduna, we have some specific services, such as our homeless service, which is basically working with quite a few people who are homeless in that community, and there is quite a large group of homeless people just outside of Ceduna. And we also have a 24/7 domestic violence service and shelter. Plus we have quite a lot of mental health work also in Ceduna. So I'm sure I've forgotten some. There's suicide prevention.
Quite a diverse range of services and programs.
And we have some Aboriginal specific programs on top of that.
Wow, so it sounds like you're very busy.
Keeps us engaged, yes. Yeah.
So what is your background as a professional social worker in a rural area?
I started in Whyalla back in 1975, so it's 40 years ago. It's a long time, isn't it?
So you have a lot of experience.
I was actually the director of the Whyalla Counselling Service way back in 75. And I was there till 1982. So I did both. When I say director, it was a two-person agency, but it sounded really good. So I did a lot of counselling, a lot of work with different ethnic groups that came to Whyalla, particularly the South American people and also Vietnamese in the early 1980s. We had quite an influx of people there, so I worked closely in working with them. And in 1982 I went to the university and started as a lecturer and was there for a lot of years, 22 years, where worked as lecturer in social work, also involved in a graduate diploma in counselling, and eventually moved to senior lecturer, associate professor, and left there in 2005 and came here. And when I came to Centrecare, we had just under 30 staff, about 27 staff I think it was, and we now sit 10 years later at 120 staff.
Wow, so that's grown a lot.
It's grown a lot. I think we're the fastest growing business in the region.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a worry.
That's a good point actually.
Yeah. So, and obviously some of our communities are suffering right at the moment. But we also grew during some of the good times. So it's the ability to really, I think, keep in closely with your community and connect very well with your community. And we've tried to, one of the strategies we've tried is that we believe that we're in a community, we try and, what I would call, embed ourselves in that community by actually trying to get premises, and some of those premises we own, so that people can see we're actually make a commitment and there for a long time.
feel part of the community.
Yeah.
I guess the stability of having been based there.
Exactly. Yeah. That we're not there for a couple of years and then going to move on.
Yeah.
And of course it's subject to funding, but we've been fortunate to get a lot of graduates from, the Whyalla campus, for example, which has helped us staff the region in many ways.
Yeah. Excellent. So, drawing on your experience, what do you believe are the most significant issues unique to social work practice in rural and remote areas?
There are many. You're dealing with distance all the time, so you have people located in a long way away from each other, and so trying to find the right skill set in each community is really important. In some communities it is very difficult to attract staff, and in one or two of those communities you might attract the staff, and then especially if the individual doesn't have an understanding of what it's like to be in a remote community, they may not stay very long.
Right. So retention.
And in some communities, you're not actually necessarily liked for being there.
Yeah.
Because we're actually dealing with often the end that people don't want to deal with, like the domestic violence, homelessness, for example, in Ceduna. There would be people in Ceduna who would prefer us not to be in their community, and it's been fascinating. Even finding premises, we couldn't actually go into where people have houses because they actually don't want you there. Yeah. So we actually have to be located more in the central location.
Okay.
Because there was some reaction to having those kinds of services close to them.
Yeah.
So there are a whole range of issues. Staffing, ongoing funding, distance, but in many ways a lot of the issues are caused through distance. Yeah.
So how, I guess you've mentioned one way that you get around basing yourself in the community, but how do you deal with the distance barrier?
I don't know whether you deal with it perfectly. I don't think you can.
Yeah, of course.
But it's important to set up structures like we've set up that we have a manager in each office, so that looks after that particular location, and then we will have often program managers out on top of that. So those program managers are expected to interact with their staff across the region, and that can be either through teleconferencing or Skype usually,
right.
One of those two means. And it's important, and then there is the local manager to look after the community-based issues. So It's important to have both, because otherwise we'll be leaving our staff without some connection.
Yeah.
And as a team, Centacare tries to meet, in most of the programs, people in programs will meet every couple of months as a group. So we'll choose the location. That will be, for example, we might go to Woodner, which is 250 k's away from Whyalla, and everyone will just converge there for a day's workshop. And once a year we bring the whole teams together. So it's technology plus face-to-face plus phone, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. So although you're working some distance apart from each other, you support each other and come together regularly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I send a weekly communique out to all staff, which we call the Centacare Times, which just gives a brief update of what's happening so that staff can still feel connected. And it always really pleases me when I actually get feedback from staff in some of the other offices, because there is some form of connection with them.
Yeah. So there's no need to feel isolated.
They're a little bit less isolated. And part of my role is to try and get out to each of the offices outside of Whyalla and Port Augusta, which aren't too hard to get to, at least once every 2 months, so that your presence is known and the same. But I don't want to go there for no reason either. But I think staff do appreciate seeing the person in charge. And in the human services, we're very much a people-based organisation. And And I think the relationship building with staff is absolutely critical.
Yeah.
And if you're in an ivory tower, you're not actually making that connection.
No.
And so, for example, for me, I've made it a point to learn every staff member's name, so that, no matter whether they've started 1 week or been here 10 years, 10-year ones are very easy. Learn the name. New staff members, ring them, congratulate them on joining Centacare and wishing them well. And one little thing I do also to build that connection is, I'm starting my Christmas card writing by hand for every staff member, and I try and give a little bit of a story that relates to them. Yeah. So just because it's really critical to look at how you overcome those barriers, and without doubt, the relationship side is absolutely critical to the culture of the organisation, the morale of staff, all those areas.
Yeah. So then staff feel supported and connect, like you said, that sense of connection. And the other side of that, which moves on to most probably what you'll talk about later, but the importance of supervision and professional development. I have a very strong view that staff in rural remote should not be disadvantaged, that they should be entitled to the same level of professional development as if they were in a metropolitan location. Because many of those staff over time will move. Sadly, one of the problems that we might have is that if my managers aren't moving, how do those staff progress? And sometimes they have to leave us. But we should have made the best effort to provide them with opportunities to actually move forward in their career. So, and supervision is absolutely sacrosanct that it happens. So how do you go about doing that over a large distance?
Well, everyone will have a manager stroke supervisor appointed. Not all my staff are social work, but where they are social work, we try, where possible, to have them supervised by a social worker, but that doesn't always necessarily happen because of distance and other locations.
Yeah, for sure.
But the majority are. So both managers and the program managers have a very strong responsibility as part of their role to provide that supervision to staff. And it's critical. And it starts from me. If I'm not doing it with staff, then it
has that flow-on effect.
Yes, it does.
And then if staff aren't supported, then they can't do their job to the best of their ability.
Absolutely. And it's really critical at times to also put in a little bit more for those who are more isolated. So, for example, our staff in Woodner, who are very competent, very capable staff, but they want to know that they're still valued and whatever, so you make a little bit more effort to make that connection with them. Or our lone worker in Cooperative needs to most probably have, most probably every 2 or 3 days needs contact with the supervisor, just to feel that, she's still part of the team, she's still part of the network, because and that's where a good organisation will make sure those things are happening. And because it's very easy if you're very isolated to start to feel, does anyone really care? And it is important for remote workers to get a sense of being cared for.
It is. So I guess just, I know you've already talked about retention, staff retention obviously, and the importance of supervision. As far as recruitment, how do you actually go about getting people into those positions, and what are some of the difficulties there?
We've been lucky in many ways because we have, for the social work positions, often used the 3rd year and 4th year placement situations, and particularly that involves both Whyalla and Port Augusta to a greater extent. And if you look at our staff in both locations, quite a few of those staff have actually come through from being 3rd or 4th year students and then have progressed to working with us. So that's been a marvellous recruitment strategy. I think one of the things that's critical and sometimes hard to identify is that I believe if we are providing that supervision, professional development, have a positive culture, then those people, either within our agency or outside, will see that. And certainly we attract staff from other agencies around in those communities as well, because they see it's a good place to work. And it's fascinating, like when we started in Ceduna, we were 2 staff, we're now 30-something staff. And it's amazing as you build some pool of staff, how the quality of applicants has actually improved as well.
Okay.
So that there is almost a relationship between the size of the office and the quality of the applicants. The bigger the office, the better the quality of applicants. Because when we first started in Ceduna, we really, really struggled. Couldn't get qualified people, couldn't do this, couldn't do that. But as we've actually established and got settled, it still doesn't necessarily mean it's easy. In towns like Port Lincoln, there are simply not enough qualified people to go around, so we're all competing. And we can get the occasional person from Adelaide, but not often.
Okay.
So it's just a matter of, I think, doing as much as you can right in what we would think is good social work practice, and that can actually make a difference.
Yeah, so it sounds like word of mouth and people actually seeing that that's a good place to work, and it sounds like by being in the community for a long time and building the size of the organisation, kind of demonstrated credibility almost in a sense, and confidence. And they're critical. They are critical, and you know, like, and by having other good staff employed, does help to attract other people. So, you know, yet at the same time we will lose staff, and I take that as a given. We cannot sometimes provide staff members with the opportunity for advancement or expanding their career in the direction they may wish to. And I think we should be, you know, some people get very annoyed that these people would leave or whatever. I've always taken the view you should never stop someone looking for something better. Because I think that's helpful to them, and you never know, they may come back and join you that's
again
it,
at some
and bring all of those skills and that experience as well.
Exactly. So I think that's really important, and it also creates then good relationships with other agencies from them moving on. And I remember in Port Lincoln we had a person who acted manager, and after the normal manager came back from maternity leave, you know, he was really desperate to get a manager's job, but we couldn't provide it. And it was marvellous to see him now in the Riverland with a really good manager's job. And you know, I ran him into a petrol station whilst I was on leave in January. And you know, he came up and gave me a shake and a hug and said, you know, you gave me my chance, etc., etc. And I think that's what we want to try and do. It is about building that positive relationship.
Oh, that's excellent to have that attitude, and to know also that you've been part of people's professional development and journey.
Absolutely.
And like you said, it helps to build connections.
It does.
Which is critical in rural communities and across communities.
And some of these people I train may well be in a few years' time, you know, in quite senior positions wherever. And, you know, and if they've got positive memories, it all helps.
That's it. Oh, excellent. Thank you for that. So I guess going back to some more significant issues unique to rural practice, do you think there are any others that you've encountered?
I think there is always the issue for the rural practitioner that often they're in small communities, so it's not unusual to know people who come in as clients, and the ethics of dealing with that and being able to maintain that level of confidentiality and making sure that you really can is always a challenge for the rural social worker. And I think it's really important. I remember when I was back in practice, and this is no exaggeration, but half the cricket team I was playing in at the time were clients of the agency. And so you have to really be careful about how you ensure that that information isn't shared with others or that confidentiality is remained. You have to be careful also not to take maybe a view you've seen out in the community into the counselling situation, that you're working with this person right here, right now. You are also sometimes working with people in the community of different skill sets, and how do you actually develop a positive relationship with them, because there will be people who might be a little bit threatened because you're the qualified person in other agencies where there are unqualified people. So how do you actually try and get rid of those barriers? So very much the awareness that you are often in a fairly tight environment, and you are more on show. You know, I talk to my staff and say, look, you know, if you go to a hotel, have a good time. But if you've been drinking, take a taxi, because you don't want to be seen to be picked up for drunk driving or something else or whatever it might be, because those things go through the community very quickly.
Sure.
You know, and your professional reputation is really crucial to what future development you have. So it's around that tightness of community, I think, for me, and not sometimes being able to break away from the workplace. Because you're always running into clients. I've actually made in my role as CEO, I've made a very distinct policy, except when, you know, letters from government come through or whatever, I don't know a name of a client. Because whoever I meet in the community, I meet as that person. They're, you know, I know they've been in seeing a counsellor or whatever. I've made it very distinct. I don't get involved at all. I can talk about the issues, but I will never, you know, with a counsellor or help them work through something, but I will never, ever learn the name of the client. Because I think that just makes my job that much easier.
And I guess as a CEO, because you're supporting staff, you can support them without knowing the name of the client, so that's protecting their confidentiality. But do you have any strategies for rural social workers, drawing on your experience, or when you're supporting staff, any things that help with dealing with those issues in small communities?
I think that's where you come back to your supervision, professional development, and opportunity every so often to go to training outside the community, to get away from that community at some stage. It's really important. So providing some peer mentoring also is really critical in programs, that groups can get together and actually share the issues, common issues, because there will be common issues across most of the towns. I think it's really important. We do provide a little bit extra leave for staff through having our grace days between Christmas and New Year, which is a recognition that staff actually, you know, are dealing with a heavy workload often, so providing a little bit extra holidays. So there's a range of strategies. Nothing spectacular. But I think it all starts with effective supervision to really be able to pick up, is this staff member under stress or not? Because if you're not picking that up, then lots of other complications occur. But if you can actually pick that up reasonably early, then you can develop the strategies to deal with that.
So, are there any other issues? Being the CEO, I guess you're the best person. You probably have a lot of experience in like issues around competitive tendering in rural communities, and how does that affect the relationship with other organisations?
I think most probably going back when I first started, it was a really hot issue, and it's still a hot issue today. But I think as you develop, you've got to separate things in a sense. Like we will compete against quite a few agencies for a tender, but those agencies are just trying to strengthen their own agency. like we're trying to strengthen our own agency. So it should not impact on the relationships you then have with people at the senior level. You just don't, you have some areas that are out of bounds. In a sense, you don't talk about the nature of what you're putting in your submission. But I've often rung other agents and said, look, we're not going for this. Just letting you know that if you're interested, if you are, we're not going to be an agency competing for this tender. And some of our competitors have done the same with me as well.
Right, okay.
So I think, and like last week, I rang the CEO of United Care Wesley Country SA, which is another large agency in our region, and said, look, I think we need to do something about all these job losses. And we need to contact both the state and Commonwealth governments and departments and see if we can get something moving. So, interesting, last week we had Department of Social Services up here to review what's going on in the community, and United Care Wesley had the State Government Department review, come and visit them in Port Pirie. So, it's that joint effort to do something better for our community.
Social action.
And that's really crucial. So, and I would feel very comfortable going, and United Care Wesley is often a competitor, but we're very comfortable doing that. Very comfortable talking through the bigger issues. Like issues with funding, and both, for example, us as agencies, one of our biggest threats is agencies from interstate or Adelaide just getting itchy feet and wanting to come into our region. So there's some good connectedness in working together. And at the service delivery level, if we're not actually working in the best interest of clients, we may as well close up. So, if it's important to work with mental health, United Care Wesley, Mission, whoever, to benefit this particular client, that is the top priority.
So in the end, it's about remembering the cause and remembering why you're working.
The core is to provide.
And working together, although you may be competing for funding, still remembering that overarching.
You separate that out. And they are doing their job as we're doing our job to try and make our agency stronger.
And what an excellent attitude to have, because in the end, that's what the purpose of social work is, isn't it? Is serving the clients and the community. Sometimes you can be disappointed when you lose. Oh yeah, for sure. That's just,
or celebrate when you win. But for me, most probably the bigger issue is this issue, like the government is actually reducing the number of agencies in funding. Like recently in our financial counselling programs in the state were reduced from 10 to 3 by the Commonwealth government.
So that's quite a significant
It's a
reduction.
huge reduction. So it was left with Anglicare, Salvation Army, and in this region ourselves. A lot of other good agencies missed out. So that's the sort of thing, and both state and Commonwealth are doing that where they may have had 60 or 70 agencies, they're reducing them maybe to 30 in that situation or less, 10 back to 3 in this situation. So it's important that I as a CEO don't just accept a good standard. I have to now really say, well, we've actually got to do better than good. What are we doing that will actually, the funder will say, yes, we should refund them. What's making the difference? What are they doing more than someone else? So that kind of attitude. And I think it actually then helps create a culture of positiveness too, that we're constantly moving forward, we're not staying the same. Change is just part of what happens.
And that's important, isn't it, to remember that?
And most social workers, I think, given the nature of the frameworks that they look at, I think, whether solution-based, strengths, systems, whatever it might be, there are change components built into each of those frameworks of social work, which hopefully then enables those social workers to feel more comfortable with the agency changing all the time as well.
And that's it, when you're dealing with people and policy and society in general, it does change, so you need to change.
It's constantly changing.
Accordingly.
Yeah.
So talking about change, I guess, What are some of the different approaches that you use when working with rural communities in order to, I guess, provide services?
The solution-based framework is one that we've adopted pretty strongly as an agency.
Yep.
And strength-based perspective as well. So they're very much part of the general framework of, certainly in many of the areas we are. I like a systems-based approach too, because a systems-based approach actually can identify some differences in the community through using that. So we I don't push a particular framework and say you must use this approach. It does depend on the individual needs of the client.
That's it.
So we use eclectic approaches, but part of the tool bag I would be expecting are systems, solutions-based, strengths-based, most probably then some more theoretical knowledge, some psychosocial developmental knowledge, particularly around in the foster care area around attachment theory, those sorts of things. In terms of our general counsellors, they will have a range of different approaches. I still like some aspects of narrative therapy, but in the end I leave it to the counsellor to find out what's most appropriate.
And like you said, it's about working with the client and using theory that's appropriate for them, not trying to make the client fit into the theory.
No, exactly. It always worries me at times. I've seen people come back and said, this is the approach, this is the way we're going to go, this will fit. And I don't know a particular approach that will work with everyone.
No.
You have to use different
how easy
styles.
would that be?
Oh, yeah, exactly. You have to use different styles, different techniques, depending on the individual or family.
So I guess in regards to, we were talking about change before, and I guess technology is a big part of change. Do you use that at all in your services?
We certainly do. As I said, Skype is just a common part of our work. We have video conferencing between some of our offices too, that helps. And we're just starting for some remote communities looking at moving into e-counselling.
Okay.
We're setting that up at the moment in Roxby Downs and Andamuka, and we'll most probably also run general e-counselling through Cooper. So that will be a new technique. Being a little bit old-fashioned in this area, I do like the face-to-face. But it will be a great experiment to see how it actually works, to try the e-counselling. And we can't, we're not going to be funded easily to be in some of these communities. So providing this will be fascinating to see how it actually works. And I would see that as being something we will monitor and watch closely to work out the effectiveness of that. But that will be up and running early next year.
That's exciting. So it's really about embracing technology and embracing change and using that to facilitate. And
we've got new IT programs that are the most modern to do all that. So it's the biggest problem is some of these locations don't have very strong internet connections, and so it's working through all those practical issues, to actually get it set up is a little bit of a task in itself.
But exciting for the future.
Oh, it is, and it is part of looking at, okay, how do we actually take this forward? And how do we actually service the region rather than just the communities where we have offices located? And this is the way forward.
And like you said, face-to-face might be the ultimate way to go, but at least you're able to reach these communities and provide a service.
That's why we called it the REACH program.
Very fitting. That's excellent. So we'll just finish with one last question. I guess we've already talked about that with but it's in regards to the ethical issues and dilemmas faced by human services workers in a rural context.
Can I maybe take it? I talked at the National Symposium of Social Workers last week about the importance of what I call principled values.
Okay.
And one of the things I think a worker has to do in rural communities is whatever you say is what you do. And yet you can be very much challenged. And giving you an example at a more macro level, we about 15 months ago as a board, my board said we're not going to be involved in income management, which is where, a significant amount of money is taken away from the client, and they only get a small amount left. The rest is used to pay for rent and other activities. And our board said, no, we can't be seen to be an authoritarian-based agency and involved in that process of assessing people for income management. 2 days later, I get a phone call from the Department of Social Services saying, would you like to provide the financial counselling component of income management? Oh my goodness gracious. And what I did, because I knew the board was saying no, yet at the same time, if I lost an opportunity to provide the background to this, it may have further implications for our financial counselling programs down the track. So what I actually said to them is, will you let me rewrite the terms of reference? Because we cannot be seen to be an authoritarian-based agency. We are a support-based agency. And the guy said, well, that's most unusual, but if you wish to, and want to do that, I can't guarantee you'll keep the funding. I said, that's fine, but I still want to do it. And so I rewrote those that was in a support role rather than an authoritarian role. An hour later they came back and said, yes, that's fine.
That's excellent.
And so, it was a clear example as an agency that we have these values and we've demonstrated we keep to them. And for our clients, then they weren't in a conflicting situation where we're providing both authoritarian and support roles. We were just providing the one. So that's really critical. The others I've talked about is about confidentiality, behaviour of the individual. That recognition that in rural communities the personal and professional are enmeshed to a fair extent. So you've got to be conscious of how you behave personally, because people will still often see you as a social worker 24/7. So there's some of the issues.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time, and I think that listening to you today will be so beneficial to the students in giving them an insight into some of the issues faced by rural social workers and working in a rural area. So thank you.